Mulan is out in cinemas now, the new version of Disney's classic animated feature. Stars Yifei Liu, Donnie Yen, and Jet Li. And the movie had a difficult time ever since it was first announced, pretty much. First, it was revealed that there would be significant changes in regards to the original, in comparison to the original animated version. Most notably, the character of Mushu would be removed, and there would be no songs whatsoever. Now, this news immediately sparked a loud reaction in the Disney fandom. The fans were shouting that clearly heads must roll for this. Which I think is a bullshit reaction because Mulan is a character originally from a Chinese legend, and both the character of Mushu and having the story be a musical were Disney's additions, Disney's deviations originally. This new film was supposed to be not so much a remake of that animated version, but rather a fresh adaptation of the source legend, which to me makes perfect sense. And also, as a second point, when Aladdin and Lion King, the new films, were released, people were furious, saying that those are shot-for-shot remakes that don't change anything. So what's the point in releasing them? And now Mulan changes things and also gets shut on. So just pick a side, people. Then there was the elephant in the room, which is the COVID pandemic. Mulan's release date was postponed from April or May, can't remember, to September. And since American movie theaters are still mostly closed, Disney decided to do an experiment with the release. Wherever possible, the film is now playing in theaters. Elsewhere, it is available on Disney Plus for I think $30 on top of the monthly subscription. And then it will be made available for all subscribers of the service in December. Many people are saying it's a kind of experiment with which model will be the best. There are speculations that if Disney Plus numbers are high enough and theatrical release doesn't make as much money as expected, other Disney movies may follow. There's talk about Black Widow next. The final hurdle for Mulan was the China-related controversies. First, the lead actress went public with comments about how she supports the Chinese government in the whole Hong Kong situation, which sparked outrage in the West. And then very recently it was revealed that parts of the film, well, most of the film was filmed in New Zealand actually, but parts of the film were shot on location in China, in the very same province that where the Chinese Muslims are currently being persecuted and locked away in concentration camps. And in the movie's credits, there's even a special thanks to the government of that province for all their help on the film. So that's obviously pretty horrible, ethically speaking, and I think it's a much better argument for having issues with the film, rather than changing stuff from the animated version. There have been calls to boycott the movie completely in response to all this news. How much traction that will get, we'll have to see. The showing I went to yesterday was quite packed with a lot of young people, so who knows. Now, putting all that stuff aside, let's try to talk about the movie itself. As I mentioned, it's a fresh adaptation of a classic Chinese legend of Hua Mulan, a young girl who supposedly really lived around the 5th century and went into the army instead of her old and sick father. She pretended to be a man all this time, and through her skill and hard work and dedication, she learned combat and tactics on a level that made her a feared warrior, brilliant leader, and eventually a war hero. The story ends with the Emperor of China offering her a prestigious position in court, and that's when she finally reveals that she was actually a girl all this time. The story shown in the film is pretty close to that. The invaders this time around are the Ruran instead of the Huns, which is actually more historically accurate. And there is a new significant character on that side of the conflict, a powerful witch that helps demolish the Chinese garrisons. But, surprise, surprise, is also shunned because of her gender. So she's this natural counterpoint a counter character to Mulan. So let's start with the good stuff. I think the production design, the costumes, sets, locations, hairstyles, weapons, that's all brilliant. Especially the wardrobe, colorful, beautiful, very representative of Chinese culture. Great stuff. I liked the score, which mixes traditional Western orchestral music with some of the more traditionally Asian instruments. I think that cinematography at times is great. I really enjoyed the wide shots of natural environments as well as the imperial city. But it is not as good in action sequences. I think the movie suffers from the common problem called Death of a Thousand Cuts, where the edit is so fast it takes away from the choreography. There's one sequence, especially in the first act, with the evil witch fighting some soldiers, and it just gave me a headache. Every second there's like 3 cuts. Terrible, terrible editing. The fight scenes also kind of borrow from the wuxia film genre. think Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or Hero, or House of Flying Daggers, that sort of stuff. And all these warriors, flying around on cables and doing these long jumps and running on walls. But somehow in Mulan, it feels like the filmmakers were afraid to commit to that aesthetic. Like, they use it just enough to make you recognize it and think that, there's maybe something wrong with the gravity in this world, but not enough to make you go, all right, this is full on crazy wuxia fight, let's go. Which I think is a shame. I would have loved to see them go just all in on that premise. I think it would have made the action sequences way more impressive and unique than they actually are in the film. Because there's clearly a lot of work that went into the film on that front, and the actors are capable physical performers. Donnie Yen is amazing as always in that regard, and I hear that Yifei Liu performed about 90% of her own stunts, which is huge. But because of the poor way the fights are shot, you don't often get to really appreciate all of that. And the movie also has one significant issue for me, and it's that contrary to what the story tells us, it's about, the stakes in terms of especially visual storytelling get progressively lower the farther we go into the film. What I mean is this. First act, Mulan's village. Very colorful, lots of people, lots of different costumes, feels very lively. Training camp, similar thing. Wide shots with loads of extras, many people in the shots, a large number of tents and warriors, etc. Then we get to the second act and there's this battle sequence, and it's suddenly so underwhelming and unexciting. One thing is the editing of the battle itself and the sequence of things that Mulan does in it, which makes it seem very jumbled and poorly planned and just weird. But completely separately from that, it looks as though there's just like 100 people on one side and 100 people on the other. So you have this sweeping plain in between huge mountains, and in the middle of it, two ridiculously small armies just charging at one another, and then one cut after, fighting one-on-one with their horses suddenly gone, nowhere to be found. It feels small and cheap. But that's not the end of it, because then we get to the final act, and the stakes in theory should be the highest yet. Mulan and her unit have to save the emperor, have to save the imperial city, and save the entire country, basically. But there's nobody in those scenes. Suddenly the world is empty. The scale goes even lower. At this point in time, there's only like a dozen guys on one side and a dozen on the other. Like, what is this? Instead of the movie looking like it should, which is an epic, high-budget blockbuster, it feels like a small student film pretending to be something bigger. We're told this is a war, but there are no armies. And I mean, I haven't watched the original Mulan in quite some time, but I still vividly remember that one scene of Huns charging over the snow-covered mountain. The army was huge. The sound of the weight of all the horses stomping on the ground made you feel small and just had this grand scale. In the new Mulan, there is zero sense of that grandeur, and as a result, it is not exciting. It's not awesome. It's just, And I think this is the movie's biggest sin of them all. Bad editing in fight scenes, I could forgive. Plot ceasing to make any sense in the final act, I could forgive. But if a high-budget movie based on an epic Chinese legend is this unexciting, is this underwhelming, well, I think we have a problem. And to sum all of this up, the new Mulan is not a completely terrible movie by any means. It has some great elements in it. It has some heart, and it has some humor, and it has some cool action sequences in it. I think a lot of people will end up enjoying it. But for me, the movie was just mediocre, and I cannot forgive that one thing, that it fails most spectacularly where it should shine most brightly, at being an amazing spectacle.